Israel performs its long-awaited strike against Iran. A district court judge rules President Trump must give up command of the California National Guard to Governor Gavin Newsom. Then the Ninth Appeals Court reverses that an hour later. And Senator Alex Padilla is handcuffed for rushing DHS Secretary Kristi Noem's podium in a press conference, then hosts a series of pity parties for himself. I'm Tony Kinnett, host of the Daily Signal's Tony Kinnett Cast, syndicated nationally at 7 p.m. Eastern. It is Friday, June 13th, the end of the longest week so far in 2025. This is the Daily Signal's top news in 10. Before we get into the top news in 10 itself, I'm going to be a little more candid with you than perhaps I normally would be. It is currently 12:33 a.m. the morning of Friday, June 13th. A little bit later than we normally record the top news in 10. This was so I could stay up and see how some of the events that are very rapidly developing might turn out before we release the episode 4.5 hours from now. The primary question I wanted to see answered was whether or not Iran would officially declare war against the state of Israel through its parliament and leadership. And the answer to that question so far is kind of. There is a supposed statement from the Ayatollah suggesting that he has survived the series of strikes which are currently ongoing. I believe the fourth sortie into Iranian territory from the Israeli Air Force has just commenced as I'm saying this. Supposedly, the Ayatollah has survived and has declared blood for blood and a series of retaliatory measures against Israel and the United States, whom at this present time is claiming no responsibility or action in the attacks themselves. Regardless, here's what we know right now. Multiple reports from major media outlets, the Israeli military and media, as well as many sources in the Iranian military, are reporting that the entire Iranian general staff, including the head of the general staff of the military and several senior Iranian nuclear scientists were, quote, all eliminated, end quote, last night. At 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time last night, we received word while we were still on the air that there were a series of strikes being carried out in Tehran, the capital of Iran, which initially were suspected to just be air defense sites, later were confirmed to also be the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as several residences which were expected to house senior Iranian military officials. Given the admission that several of those officials were killed, it is highly likely that is now the case. Additional attacks were carried out on specifically Natanz, which is the Iranian main uranium enrichment facility, as well as Arak, a major water reactor area, Kermanshah, and Tabriz. Here is a statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on what he has called Operation Rising Lion.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival. 80 years ago, the Jewish people were the victims of a Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazi regime. Today, the Jewish state refuses to be a victim of a nuclear Holocaust perpetrated by the Iranian regime. Now, as Prime Minister, I've made it clear time and again, Israel will never allow those who call for our annihilation to develop the means to achieve that goal. Tonight, Israel backs those words with action. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel. Each of these missiles carries a ton of explosives and threatens the lives of hundreds of people. Soon, those missiles could carry a nuclear payload, threatening the lives not of hundreds, but of millions. Iran is gearing up to produce 10,000 of those ballistic missiles within 3 years. Now just imagine 10,000 tons of TNT landing on a country the size of New Jersey. This is an intolerable threat. It too must be stopped.
Less than an hour after the attack from Israel into Iran had commenced, the White House released a statement from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, quote, "Tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel." President Trump did respond to a comment later, saying, quote, "Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb, and we are hoping to get back to the negotiating table. We will see. There are several people in leadership that will not be coming back," which would be a reference to some of the Iranian leaders who were killed by Israel. We will spend much more on this subject, I am positive, this evening at 7 p.m., but due to the Top News in 10 being a 10-minute news program, we do in fact need to move on to the second headline of the evening, which is the incredible flip between the release of the court decision against President Donald Trump by Clinton appointee U.S. District Court Judge Charles Breyer. This was that Thursday hearing we had referenced earlier in the week. He found in his conclusion, quote, "For the foregoing reasons, the court grants the plaintiffs, Gavin Newsom's, motion for a temporary restraining order. Defendants are temporarily enjoined from deploying members of the California National Guard in Los Angeles. Defendants are directed to return control of the California National Guard to Governor Newsom. The court further stays this order until noon on June 13th, 2025, at which time, on noon of today, Trump would theoretically, if following this judge's order, which is not even remotely constitutional, turn over the power of commanding the National Guard of California to Governor Gavin Newsom, thus violating several federal laws as well as Title X of the Defense Act of 1940. It's an entire mess. Gavin Newsom took no time at all to put out a celebratory video that he pinned to the top of his page. Check it out.
So I'm very hopeful this order puts that in perspective, and hopefully Donald Trump will immediately back down. The courts have ruled on the guard. They will be back under my command, and he'll be relieved. Donald Trump will be relieved of his command at noon tomorrow.
And just 1 hour later, while we were rather busy with other things, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of President Trump and his administration, granting the request for an administrative stay. In short, the appeals court ruled that for at least the next 5 days until a panel held by Zoom on June 17th, that President Trump does not have to turn over control of the National Guard to Governor Gavin Newsom and does retain his constitutional title and congressionally outlined duties of Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Forces of the United States Military. And last and also least, Democrat Senator Alex Padilla from California was handcuffed for rushing the podium of the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem during a press conference she was giving just before she was scheduled to have a meeting with the senator from California.
This country and what they have tried to insert into this city. So I want to say thank you to every single person that has been able to do.
Hands up, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your hands up.
How many of our ICE agents have been docked?
On the ground. On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back.
If you let my hands go, put them behind my back.
Padilla was temporarily detained, handcuffed by the Secret Service and FBI because he wasn't wearing his Senate security pin and identification that would say, hey, I'm a senator. Don't arrest me for getting too close to a Secretary of the United States, especially a Homeland Security Secretary during a time of nationwide unrest and riots that are anti-DHS. This didn't stop Padilla from going in front of the country and giving a very heartfelt series of pity parties.
I was almost immediately forcibly removed from the room. I was forced to the ground, and I was handcuffed. I was not arrested. I was not detained. I will say this. If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country.
For those of you elected officials tuning into the Tony Kinnett Cast, a word of advice to the wise. If you have a conversation you'd like to have either in public or in private with a secretary of the president's cabinet, I recommend keeping your security identification present and clearly visible so a federal agent trying to keep that secretary safe doesn't recognize the individual walking towards someone, shouting and getting closer to them as a threat that needs to be tackled and given the old handcuff routine. Before you go, head down to the description and make sure you're subscribed to the Tony Kinnett Cast. And join us tonight for a serious roundup that I'm quite certain will be stuffing news clips into the show all the way up until it's time to go on air. I'm Tony Kinnett, and this has been the Daily Signal's Top News in 10. Take care.